Hello, I'm Felicia Jackson.
And I'm Giulia.
Welcome to Shaken Not Burned. Every day we're bombarded with headlines of crisis and disruption, from climate shocks to inequality to AI upheaval.
But behind the noise are patterns, choices, and opportunities. What we need is sustainability literacy, the clarity and confidence to interpret complexity, see trade-offs, and make decisions.
Our podcast goes beyond the headlines to uncover how real people are tackling change and what we can all learn from them.
And you can use these ideas to stay steady, even unshakable, in a world that feels uncertain.
This is Shaken Not Burned.
Welcome to a new episode of Shaken Not Burned. I'm your co-host, Giulia Bottaro. We need to get to the heart of a question that seems more urgent than ever. What does it mean to be a responsible business? Not in theory, but in practice, right now. Given the debates going on about ESG and sustainability, whether ESG is dead in the water or whether sustainability needs a radical rethink, the fundamentals underpinning our ever-evolving environment have not changed. This isn't about ticking sustainability boxes or chasing the next acronym. It's about what it really means for a company to be a responsible actor in a world under strain and why the time for half measures is over. Today we're joined by Steve Kenzie, Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network UK, to talk about what's not working and what needs to change.
Hello, Steve. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Giulia, my pleasure to be here.
Can you tell me a bit about your experience and then what is the UN Global Compact and, how it came into existence?
It's a very good question. So I've been looking after the Global Compact Network in the UK since 2007, so quite a while. Before that, I worked at an NGO. Before that, I did a master's degree in corporate sustainability. And before that, I owned a bike shop in Canada. So it was quite a career transition into the Global Compact. So what is Global Compact? It started in 2000 with, it really started in 1999 with a speech that then Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, gave at Davos. And he, in his speech, proposed to the business leaders that they form a global compact with the UN to establish a set of universal values for what it would mean to be a responsible business. And the great innovation that Kofi Annan had was that these universal values could be defined. It's so difficult to negotiate that sort of thing. Rather than having to start a whole new negotiation, he recognized that written into established UN treaties and conventions that had already been ratified by most countries in the world, he could draw out a set of principles that would work. And so that's what he did. So from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have our human rights principles. From the ILO guidelines, we have our decent work principles. From the Rio Earth Summit Charter, we have our environmental principles. And our 10th principle comes from the UN Convention Against Bribery and Corruption. Rather than having to start from scratch with a blank piece of paper, Kofi Annan and his collaborators drew out these 10 principles that were already legitimately and truly universal and could be applied around the world. And that's formed the nucleus. So in 2000, when Global Compact began, 40 CEOs signed up and said they would operationalize these principles. They would make a public commitment to them and they would operationalize them through their businesses. And from that start, we've grown, and now globally 25,000 companies around the world have made that commitment to operationalize our principles. And just one other aspect I'll mention just now is that our headquarters is at the UN in New York, but we have country networks, 63 markets. And that's where I come in. I look after, with my team, participants that are based in the UK. And we have about 1,000 companies in the UK that are participating. Our role then is to support them. We organize events and programming to hopefully inspire ambition and to enable action. And we do some advocacy work to try and shape the business environment in the UK in favor of sustainability. So our global office and our foundation of the 10 principles, and then we do our bit to help with that operationalization of the principles through the programming that we offer here at UK level and at our colleagues around the world in their other country networks are doing.
Going back to 1999, was there a feeling that these documents, these treaties signed by UN member states were not including businesses enough, and that's why there was this desire to create the Global Compact?
I think that's fair to say that it's often the case with the UN, less now, but certainly through its history, where business was an afterthought, or at the very least, that business was not viewed as a partner with whom to engage. And I think that was another really vital innovation that's come from Kofi Annan and the Global Compact, is that recognition that, in fact, nobody's denying that the activities of business have created a lot of the world's problems. But equally, we need to recognize now that if we're going to solve those problems, we need to do it with business. And to attempt to solve these problems excluding businesses is naive at best. So, yes, when you think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but that's not a document that was created particularly with business in mind. It was something that was directed more at governments. But the way that it can be effective is when there is a declaration like that and when a country has signed up to it, the companies operating in that country can't just say, no, that's not the way we do business here. Well, these are universal values. That declaration of universal human rights is something that applies in even the most challenging markets. And so now, by drawing that out in the Global Compact principles, it makes a very strong statement to companies operating in those markets that they can't just operate to a different standard in this country because that country's enforcement of the law perhaps isn't as robust as it is in other markets. These are universal standard that they need to project through their global operations. And then that seems
And this is the same for the SDGs as well.
well, it's a very similar story with the SDGs, that they were negotiated between countries. Now, because they were adopted in 2015 and at a point when the recognition of the important role of the private sector had been well established over the previous decade, it's much more of an explicit recognition in the SDGs of the important role that business has to play. I think that it's absolutely correct that the role of business is really clear there, even though business was only a tertiary participant in the negotiations themselves. They weren't directly around the table. It's evident that governments were thinking about their business communities when they were negotiating, and there's a clear recognition of how business behaviors need to change in order to achieve the goals.
And how do companies incorporate these principles and the SDGs as well in their ethos? Because I'm thinking, for example, if you have a net zero strategy, it's kind of measurable, and there are some standards out there that can help you figure out what to do with your emissions. But how do we do with things like end poverty?
Well, and poverty, interestingly, if you survey a population of citizens, that often comes up as the number one goal, the top priority goal. If you survey a group of business representatives, it's usually very near the bottom of the priorities. So there's a couple of factors in that, but the way a lot of businesses are approaching the SDGs is they're looking at what's material to their business and where can they have the most significant impact. And I think a lot of the work to be done around poverty tends to sit more with government. So there's undoubtedly an important role that business can play by paying their taxes and paying fair wages and not doing things through their operations that will negatively impact on communities. The goals are tremendously interconnected. So something that doesn't seem necessarily like discriminating against women isn't just about goal 5 and gender equality. That has a knock-on effect that will ultimately impact goal 1 and have an impact on poverty. It's difficult to isolate these things, but generally, I think companies are often reviewing the goals. It's not realistic for companies to say they're going to proactively positively contribute to all 17. I think they may well do that, but we don't necessarily advise them all to come in and solve it. It's governments that are responsible for achieving all 17. Business has a role to play in contributing, and they can identify where they can make the most meaningful contribution, and then we look to them to do that. And you see a number of companies that have done a fabulous job of mapping their value chain against the goals and targets in the SDGs and identifying which ones they can have a positive impact on, and then directing their energies there, but making sense that it is also in alignment with the business activities that they're doing, so that they are operating in a more sustainable way, and through their operations are contributing to the goals. This is a distinction between the SDGs and the Global Compact principles. Principles versus goals. And our principles don't have a time limit. These are established as just as an ethos, as a way of working. We're quite conscious that we're not a standard. This is just a set of principles, values that should infuse everything that a company does. And so Global Compact principles could inspire a company's supplier code of conduct, for example. It could inspire the way they establish their own operations and their own policies around how they deal with their people and the communities in which they operate, and their customers and their suppliers. But it's not so readily measurable, whereas the goals are meant to be achieved by 2030, and they're quite specific in the indicators and what we're seeking to achieve there. And now hopefully we will see a new set of goals coming in post 2030 to keep the momentum going. But these are nuances that companies will take into account as they're thinking about their approach, and we'll see a Global Compact participant that is publicly a participant in our initiative, and they'll have a different public profile around their work around the SDGs.
Right, so I was making a bit of confusion there with the principles and the SDGs. So what exactly in practice does the compact do to help companies?
Well, here in the UK network, I think it says our strategy is to inspire, enable, and shape. So we like to, from the inspire pillar, the idea is to profile and highlight good practice so that companies can see what is possible and be inspired to emulate that. So we start to show what is, what is really could be done. And realistically, if they're doing it, then you could do it too. So we're not just trying to project a fantasy of a better world, but we're showing these are examples of companies that have a really high level of ambition, and they're actually realizing it. Our second pillar around enable is just that. We want to help companies. We want to identify the blockages that are preventing companies from being more sustainable, and then we want to educate the people working on those on tools and methods to overcome those barriers. So as an example, we've just completed a 4-part webinar series on nature and how companies can start to create a strategy around engaging on nature and managing their impacts on nature. So it's a topic that's getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of buzz around nature. Employees of companies putting pressure on their management, to do more. Customers, it's something that everybody cares about. Business have been a little flat-footed on action, on getting started on nature. We recognize that, and so we provide some programming to help kickstart action from business, to give them some tools and resources and good examples to show them how they could start engaging on that issue. We have programming if a company wants to set a science-based target for their carbon emissions. They may have an investor or a customer that's telling them, you need to have a science-based target, and they have a dilemma. Where do they go for help with that? They could go out and hire consultants to do the job for them, but many companies don't have those resources. So we offer programming that will take them on that journey to help them to get to a point where they can set a science-based target. We do that across all of the environmental, social, and governance themes. And we organize a wide range of programming to try and help companies progress.
Do you think that enough businesses are aware of this?
No, definitely not. I think that
I
here
mean,
in the
are they
UK,
free? Are these tools free?
so the nature example that I gave was free. That was a webinar that was open to the public, and the recordings of that will be available soon on our website. And so anybody can access those. The programming around science-based targets that I described is only available to companies that are participating in the Global Compact.
Right.
And there is a fee to participate, but it's based on turnover. And so the cost for smaller companies is quite manageable. And we think we give quite good value for the cost of participation. We have 1,000 members in the UK. There's probably more than 1 million businesses in the UK. We have about half of the FTSE 100. We have good representation of large companies, and about half of our membership are SMEs. But there's still clearly thousands more companies out there that we would be really keen to be working with, and I think we could really help them if they were to engage.
Do you think there is sort of a cascading effect in a value chain? So you mentioned FTSE 100 companies. If they need to measure their emissions, then they need their suppliers to provide that. So do companies tell each other about these things?
Yeah. So we have a sustainable supplier training program that the way it works is that large companies sign up and pay us a fee, and then those large companies go and invite up to 1,000 of their suppliers to participate in a training program. And the idea of it is that the large companies that are trying to make their value chains more sustainable need to get their suppliers on board that journey. And so part of that is a recognition that they can't just tell their suppliers, you have to be more sustainable. They need to support them and help make that happen. Show them why, show some commitment that, and if you come with us on this journey, we're going to have an ongoing business relationship. And so that then creates a business case for smaller companies to become more sustainable. So as you said, a cascading effect. If your customer is asking for you to be more sustainable, it's a bold move to ignore that and just carry on business as usual. And it creates an opportunity for smaller companies to gain competitive advantage. If large companies need to be able to measure their carbon footprint in their supply chain, a small company that's invested the time in measuring their own footprint is going to have an advantage when they're bidding for work, because that larger company is going to recognize what that means. And we hear that all the time from small companies, that they're definitely finding competitive advantage in being more sustainable and having it properly documented. See that EcoVadis is a very popular platform for managing sustainability in the supply chain. And again, they recognize this too, and give points for participation in Global Compact. They give points for reporting to the GRI standard. There's a recognition that there is a payback to being more sustainable. There is a business case for it.
And is this at the UK level or international level as well?
That's global. Yeah. I think it'll be different from market to market. Clearly, the well publicized ESG backlash that's emanating from the USA right now has changed the calculation for US companies, but I think that's a temporary thing. You can only deny reality for so long. Climate change is reality. That's happening. And so those that want to pretend that it's not might be able to get away with it for a little while, but generally investors and businesses are not interested in fantasies. They want evidence and things to be science based, and they would be very concerned about companies that were just ignoring the science of climate change. I think there's a similar story around DEI that's getting a lot of bad press, but it's just established as fact, I think, in the UK and across Europe, that there's a very strong business case for diversity and inclusion. And so companies may be rebadging the activities that they're engaging in around that, but there's a strong business case. Management would be derelict in their responsibilities if they were just to ignore that and pretend, no, DEI, for which there was a strong business case last year, is suddenly there's not a business case for it this year. There's a unique situation where you do business with the US government where, okay, there's a little fantasy bubble that you need to accommodate around issues like this. But for most of us that are trying to be reality based, there's a strong business case for these things.
We always say it in our podcast, you need to do something now, because if you wait maybe for regulations to force it upon you or for customers to leave, then it's too late. When is this window closing in your view in the UK, maybe, or Europe, or, the markets you're familiar with?
This is simply the direction of travel. And there's ample evidence that, young people care quite passionately about these issues, and they are considering these issues when they're looking at where they want to work. So I think this is the single strongest argument for companies to be embracing sustainability, is all just in the competition for talent. Nothing can impact on the profitability of a company more than the people working in that company. The best and the brightest can choose to work where they want to. And they're going to choose to work for companies that are demonstrably, authentically sustainable. And so a company that just isn't engaging on these issues, or that is just faking it, they might be able to get a good person into their organization for a little while. But once they start to realize it, this isn't genuine, they're going to start looking elsewhere. We see this time and time again. New graduates that are entering the workforce care about sustainability. They would rather work for a sustainable company versus one that isn't. So the question then is, what's the difference in the bottom line between having the most desirable candidate in that role, or just the one that couldn't get a job at a sustainable place and so they're settling for you? I think this is a really rock solid argument that should justify any company making a genuine commitment to this. And of course, investors recognize that. They recognize, as you had noted, the cost of waiting until you're forced to act may often be too late. You may have already lost best people from your firm. You may have lost your best customers. The cost of playing catch up is probably greater than making changes in a more gradual, controlled way. These are strategic issues. Climate change is something that's been building for going on 40 years. There's been an awareness of this. Companies that have been ignoring it and not taking steps to start to prepare, that's frankly negligent. And now, when the signs are so clear, and equally clear that the government will take action, that there is going to be changes in regulation, changes in legislation to address climate change. It's really, I think, just a basic fundamental failure of management to not be managing this issue. You expect management to be addressing all the risks and opportunities that their business is confronted with. To just ignore this set of risks for some reason, it just doesn't make sense.
That's true. Yeah, it's funny to think that let's just pretend this doesn't exist, or
There's a
yeah.
habit, like for so long, this stuff was categorized as non-financial, right? There would be financial reporting, and then there'd be non-financial reporting, as if somehow all this non-financial ESG stuff doesn't impact on the finances. But of course it does. But I think because we kind of gave it that label, there was a tendency to treat these risks and opportunities differently than we would treat other risks and opportunities that the business faces. And it's created a blind spot for a lot of managers. And that's something they really need to clear that up and just be objective. What's climate change going to do to our business? What is a lack of DEI going to do to our business? We need to be just thinking at it much more objectively and not getting caught up in some of the negative dogma around these things.
Absolutely. So when companies come to you for advice, have they given up on some level of profitability? They're like, we need to be sustainable, so we'll just have to give some money up. Is that how it works?
Well, I am strongly of the view that there's a business case for everything that we advocate. So the question, I suppose, hinges on the timeline. So sure, if a company needs to pay off an investment in a quarter, well, they may be perceived then as it's going to cost them something, and it may compromise profitability in the short term. But in the long term, this is the only pathway to long-term sustainability. An example might be to transition a fleet to electric vehicles from diesel. Clearly, that's going to require a fairly significant investment in charging capability and new vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. But over a not crazy time period, that investment would pay for itself and make the company more profitable. To answer your question, it needs to be more specific around timeline. But I think, again, my perspective is more long term. And I sympathize with people working in companies where those quarterly earnings reports are the be all and end all. Well, they have a very difficult time. And the challenge then just has to go to their investors and their boards to start thinking just a little bit further out. And where does this way of working leave us in 5 years? Is our company still going to be competitive? And I think that's really the role of investors and boards, is to be thinking that way. I mean, management as well. They've all got skin in the game to ensure that their business is future fit, and ignoring this stuff. Clearly, these are challenging times for many businesses, but it is important to make a distinction between what is an investment and what is an expense.
When you mention companies where the quarterly reports are the be all and end all, do you mean listed companies then as opposed to private ones? Yeah.
Yeah, but private companies, depending again on the situation, if it's private equity, can be very demanding when it comes to returns as well. Smaller companies that may have the luxury of thinking more long term, but there certainly are challenges there. If you need capital to invest in that transition to EV, and you're just struggling to access it, well, undoubtedly that's going to be difficult. That's a classic economic problem, that if you have capital, you can invest and lower your ongoing expenses. And if you don't, you just have to keep paying a higher cost. But it's great efforts are being made to tackle that as well. Just during London Climate Action Week, the Bankers for Net Zero initiative launched a new standard for SME reporting that they're getting some of the big banks on board to try and make the reporting requirements more manageable for small companies so that they could start to access sustainability linked financing from the banks. So to start again, further enhancing the business case for sustainability, and to make some of these investments more manageable.
Great to hear. Very
Yeah.
interesting. How does the compact hold companies accountable? We've heard about greenwashing or companies setting very ambitious targets and quietly abandoning them after a couple of years.
We require, so this is a challenging question for us in an area where we have been criticized in the past. We require companies to report annually on the progress that they're making towards operationalizing our principles. So it's called the Communication on Progress, and we enforce quite strictly that companies put this information into the public domain so that it is accessible to their stakeholders. We do not have the capacity to enforce a standard. And so this is our theory of change, is in fact that we enforce transparency and thereby empower other stakeholders to enforce a performance standard. So we will require a company to put into the public domain what they're doing, climate and social impacts. We then leave it to their employees, the people that live around their plants, to their customers, to their investors, to decide based on that information whether that's enough, and they can then pursue the change. So some may say that that's not enough, and well, I wish we could do more, but it's just simply not realistic. We have 25,000 companies that are participating in the Global Compact. Undoubtedly, some of them are using their participation to greenwash, and we do our best to root those out. But I feel the work that we do with the companies that are serious, and we can see that the progress that the companies that we work with more substantively, the progress that they're making is in fact significant. And so while I don't condone greenwashing in any way, some companies using our branding to improve their image is something that we try to root out and eliminate, but it's not possible. But we still feel it's important that we be a big tent, and we do operate on a degree of faith. So in signing the 10 principles, it's an act of faith that the CEO is making a commitment, a public commitment, and we trust that that's being made in good faith. We trust that the information that's being communicated is accurate, but we don't have the resources to go around and do an audit of all of the reports that have been submitted. That's just not the best use of our resources to do that. But we feel that other stakeholders are much better placed to be able to ascertain whether what's being reported is accurate. And we encourage them to step up if they feel that there is something going wrong.
So are you in dialogue with these stakeholders that you mentioned, the investors, local communities, and so on?
Again, we do that. I suppose it's somewhat passive, but it's all because everything is in the public domain. So the commitment from the CEO is there for everyone to see on the Global Compact website. The communication on progress is there for everyone to see on the website. The companies that are participating are all available to see on the website. So no, it's not realistic for us to be out there directly engaging the stakeholders of every one of our 25,000 participating companies. But if one of those stakeholders has a concern about a company, and they see that that company is in the Global Compact, then they can see the commitment that the CEO has made. They can see what that company is communicating, and they can use those tools to pressure the company to change their behavior, including coming back to the Global Compact and reporting that this company is in breach of the principles that they committed to. They shouldn't be in the Global Compact. And then we have mechanisms to expel them.
Okay. So is that how you found greenwashers in the past?
We have expelled many companies over the years, either for not submitting their communication on progress, then that's always grounds for expulsion because, again, we insist upon that transparency. And there are a number of cases of companies that have been in breach of our 10 principles and have been expelled for that.
Okay. So it's a mix of inaction and wrong action, I suppose.
Correct. Yeah. As I said, it's really important for us to be the big tent. There are a lot of companies that are just starting their journey, and as a result, they will have skeletons in their closet, and they will have some really big challenges that they're seeking to overcome. There've been ways of working that have been allowed, whether it's relating to carbon emissions or just generally pollution or the way workers are treated. So that's all areas where, companies are lagging. Many are lagging. And if they finally have a realization, wow, we need to get going and change the way we're working, well, we want to be a place where they can come to for support to make those changes. If we turn them away because their past is just too problematic, well, then we're slowing the progress that could be made. They're asking for help, we want to give it. But it does mean that we have some companies that are participating that have definitely got some problems. But our aim is to work with them to address those problems and to make them more sustainable.
It sounds to me really useful to have this sort of high level support, because if you're a company wanting to start in your sustainability journey, there are a million these days softwares that help with carbon accounting. There are all the standards, but then how do you choose, what's the best standard to adhere to? So you're like a grandparent, maybe, that giving some directions on life, and then they can, I suppose, well, by you, I mean the Global Compact, of course, just some general guidance so they can find their footing. Is that a fair description?
Well, I think that's a very kind description, so I'm happy to accept that. I think that it's very true that between our principles and the SDGs, there's a really good guidance just there in helping companies to identify where they should start and what are some of the issues that, to be a responsible corporate citizen, some of the issues that they need to look at. Human rights, labor, environment, anti-corruption. These are 4 pillars of the global compacts, are big buckets, but it's a really valuable starting point. We do a lot of sharing information from experts, but we also create a lot of opportunities for peer-to-peer engagement because there's so much learning to be done just by getting companies together to talk to one another. You've got challenges that are cutting across all sectors. The challenge of modern slavery, for example, it affects every sector, some more than others, but every sector has to be concerned about forced labor in their supply chain. Every sector is subject to the UK Modern Slavery Act. So when we bring people together from across sectors to talk about how are you challenging this issue, they get a lot of value from talking to each other. And someone who's spent their whole career working in retail or extractives or pharma, they will have a very different perspective on that problem. And by getting them to talk and share ideas, you start to see innovation and learning just from helping peers to get together. And it's also just a great form of support. It can be lonely being the sustainability manager in a company, often a bit siloed. And having a chance to engage with a like-minded community can be tremendously valuable.
Are you happy with the work so far? Will you continue do what you're doing? Are there any new plans to maybe evolve or change?
Just came up today in a chat I was having with someone else about just how, for something like this, a UN initiative that's been ratified all around the world, that's 25,000 participants from 160 some countries. We can't evolve the principles because they're principles and it just their foundation in those UN treaties that can't be reopened. But in terms of the way we're working with business, certainly we're constantly evolving and looking for new ways to drive value and give companies what's most helpful for them. So we work in a number of different formats. We're constantly reviewing that. We're looking ourselves at what role AI might play in our work going forward. It's a constantly evolving landscape. When I first started doing this, the whole sustainability reporting thing was so small and untested and brand new, and only a very few companies were publishing any kind of sustainability reporting. Well, now it is huge. It's an entire industry of itself, and we have to evolve as we go along. And we're looking at evolving our communication on progress to reflect that, if a company is already reporting to CSRD, what more transparency could we ask for that would add any value to anyone? So these are all big questions that we're looking at going forward. I think we will start to see a little more toughness from us, a little more challenge. We call it a communication on progress, but we're going to start looking to see real progress. So I see that as something that's coming in the years ahead, will be an expectation that companies in the reports they submit will actually be showing progress. And if they're not, we would have to perhaps question the legitimacy of the commitment they made when they joined our initiative and have a look at that. So I see that as some years away. We need to develop our own digital capacity to monitor that sort of thing. We need to figure out what are the precise questions to ask that will be fair to companies and reveal what we need to see. But I'm personally interested in seeing the pace of change increase, and so I'm certainly looking to be just a bit more challenging here at the UK network. And I think many of my colleagues in other country networks are feeling the same.
So do you feel that the progress made so far has been baby steps and you would like to see something maybe more meaningful, more large scale?
Well, it depends on the scope of the question. There are some amazing companies that have just transformed themselves, and it's extraordinary the commitment they've made to being more sustainable, and they've really made quite profound changes in their approach to the way they do business. But we only have to look at carbon emissions are still going up. So the change is woefully inadequate to the challenge. And the pace, driven by many things, right? A private company has shareholders that they're answerable to. The management can't just say we're going to accelerate our net zero target to 2030 unilaterally in the absence of stronger pressures from government. It makes it very difficult to see the change we want. So we need more ambition from companies. We need more ambition from governments. We need more ambition from people. If demand from the people were to change to be more sustainable, we would see companies respond overnight to that. The oil companies are producing oil because people keep buying oil. All of the plastic that gets purchased is because people keep buying plastic. So if the blame goes all around, it's not fair to lay it all at the feet of companies. They have drivers that they're bound to, that they have to adhere to. They can't just unilaterally do something that may put them out of business. But if we could start seeing people collectively demanding systems change so that whole industries were changed, and if the people would demand it, the government would respond, the companies would respond, and we would start seeing the change we need. So I'm not passing the buck. Companies absolutely should be showing more leadership, and many are, but I hear from them that they're trying to transition to be more sustainable, and not all of enough of their customers are following.
Yeah.
And that makes it a very difficult situation for them. So I think really the bottom line is we all have a role to play in our individual personal behaviors, in our behaviors as an employee, in whatever role we play, not just the sustainability team, but I think it's important to understand that every job in a company should be a sustainability job, and people should be looking at how could I do my job more sustainably. And we need investors to take a more long-term view of things. We need insurance companies to take a long-term view. You'd think they would. We need some of the enablers, the banks, the insurance companies, to start just saying we're not going to support unsustainable businesses anymore. So there are many levers that are to be pulled, many actions to be taken, and I think this is really it. We need more leaders at a personal level in companies, change makers within companies, the leaders of companies, the leaders in government need to be more bold and just recognize that there's some serious problems that need tackling, and they're going to need some courage.
Thank you, Steve. A very important message, and I think a perfect way to end the episode. So thanks again for sharing your experience, and hopefully some companies out there who are not aware or not familiar of the UN Global Compact can get in touch.
It'd be great. Thanks, Giulia.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in once again. We are on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, and we also have a newsletter, so you can find us there as well. Otherwise, see you next week.